Welcome to Movie and a Beer, everybody. This is Dan bringing us in, and we have a wonderful car chasey episode for you this evening, or morning, or afternoon, depending on when you're listening. We have a couple of awesome friends with us to enjoy and co-host this amazing episode about things that go bump in the night.
Well,
or not. It was shot at night. Right?
I mean, it was shot at night, but bump in the night is typically, apparently, hello listeners, this is Blake, your tropes expert. I had a different thing in mind, but I'm just going to say, so bump in the night is typically like a horror aimed at like children themes, so the themes don't get too scary.
Good recovery.
And this was definitely not a horror. It was a thriller. And this is Brian. I'm your reflections expert.
Reflection.
And tonight we are reflecting on the film Bullitt,
Yes.
1968 with Steve McQueen.
Yes, this is a really, really well-known film that's been on TV a number of times. It has very little foul language. It has some language, not a lot. There's some gore from the shootings, but not really.
Compared to the effects these days, it's not
nothing.
that bad.
It looks fake. It looks really, really fake.
Yeah, I would say this is almost a PG, just like a PG
film at this point. Yeah, it takes place in San Francisco, filmed or released around 1968. So hippie heyday. There's a few scenes where there is hippies hanging out at a restaurant with some cool, got your fingers snapping.
Some rock flute and standing bass.
Yeah.
Yes. So Steve McQueen's a fairly new, quote unquote, detective, a young man, and he's assigned to protect, someone. And that goes awry.
A state's witness.
A state's witness. And that goes sideways really fast. And knowing that we were going to watch this film, we kind of did two things. We grabbed one beer out of the fridge that it was already there from that we hadn't had yet. That was for a previous episode that we did not consume. And I stopped by the local grocery store and picked up another beer that I knew we were watching this film that has like the world-renowned car chase scene that kind of set the tone and for everything. So the Co-Pilot Pilsner from Everybody's Brewing, which is out in Stevenson, Washington, I believe, or not Stevenson. It's out by that part of the gorge. I have notes. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
White salmon, right?
White salmon. There we go.
That's what it was. Thank you.
It's like read the can and it'll tell you. Yeah. So out of white salmon, and then the second one that we had was a hazy IPA from Vice Beer, and it's a Ribbit Robot, and it's a hazy, and it actually has some very retro thing going on with a really cool kind of like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle in a Transformers outfit. And
it's TMNT meets Transformers meets Run DMC.
Run DMC, with the big shoes and the big gold chain and everything. Mm-hmm. It's kind of cool. Anyway, we're digressing. We'll talk about the beers later. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about this amazing film.
Yeah.
And there's some insider knowledge that our friend Brian here has that at some point we're going to kind of drop into a little bit and explore this masterpiece, because it was done using technology or some effects that hadn't been used before, especially with the car chase. And Brian, you had mentioned like the nighttime shots when they went to like the airport.
Yes,
they had to develop specific film to be able to do the night shots.
To shoot in such low light conditions. Yeah. So there was specialty film developed around this time that made it possible to shoot clearly at night.
Because there were a few scenes where obviously the camera was really super zoomed in and it was grainy. It looked really grainy.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, they're obviously doing that, but they're zooming in. But there were some scenes where it was backlit a little bit from the buildings behind them, but it was still, you could see them pretty clearly, which, we take for granted today. But back then, that wasn't the case. We've seen some older movies that have nighttime shots, and it's really dark. It's really, really, really dark.
It is really hard, and you can't see the contrast between the street lamps and, I mean, basically you can see that and nothing else.
Right.
And in this film, some of the stuff in the foreground is more clear.
Yeah.
And filmically, this particular film, Bullitt, has a lot to talk about, and hopefully we don't digress too much.
Yeah. So Senator Walter Chalmers, played by Robert Vaughn, is trying to take down a mob boss from Chicago. And there's a guy who escaped from Chicago from the mob who was one of their money people.
Ross, right?
Ross.
Yeah.
And stole a bunch of money. But he set up, and we're going to plot spoil this because this has been out a long time. There's a patsy that he hires, him and this guy's girlfriend, to come out and pretend to be him so he can sneak away. And this guy can get killed off by the mob because he's going to tip them off. Hey, this is where the person really is. And it's like, why does everyone, and this is one of the questions that Steve McQueen and his partner ask, like, how did you know where to go? Because only the senator knew.
I like how he did that too. I think he was eating the sandwich and drinking the milk in that scene, or just not being classic, or I guess not classic, like new tough guy cop, just standing there grizzled, glaring, just eating a meal. And guy talks to him. He says, "You knew who they were. Did you do this? Did you?
Did you tell anybody?"
Yeah.
Well, it's Steve McQueen in this isn't. I wouldn't say he follows any of the cop tropes that we're used to, because he's not a Dirty Harry tough guy.
No.
Bend the rules cop.
When was Dirty Harry? Later,
72. A little
72?
a little later.
Cool. Okay.
But he's also not kind of like the investigative genius that Sherlock Holmes is.
Right.
He's like just a cop, and he wants to get to the truth.
Yeah. He's got some street smarts. He's got that down.
Yeah, and he's definitely smart because he figures out something is up.
He does that really quickly, and it's like he thinks it's weird because he got called onto a case out of the blue that nobody knew anything about, and his supervisor was the one that suggested, "Hey, these guys are good, they're talented." But the question is, did the senator know that this was actually happening, or was he involved? Did he understand that was happening, and he was hoping the guy would get away and he'd get a contribution?
The way he kept asking really hard, like, I need that witness.
Yeah.
Where's my witness? I could see him being, that can make it look like he's in on it, but I don't think he was.
I don't think he was either. In a later scene, he kind of says, when Steve McQueen, when Bullitt tells him what had happened, he seems surprised, and he says, "Well, once you're done questioning the guy, he's mine. He's my witness."
Yeah.
He's along for the ride.
Yeah, and the thing is like, it's one thing to say, "Hey, I have this, writ of habeas corpus to like take whatever it is that's in your possession into my possession," but it's not the guy. It's the patsy, and so once he learns that, he's like, "Oh, well, I guess I don't have anything." The real guy's
I can't really order you to do anything
because it's not
all my leverage just went away.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. We talk a little bit about during the film. There was a scene where it's a fax. And the guy actually puts the phone down on top of this giant machine.
It took all of us a second to catch it. Like once I saw the phone handle. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fax machine early on. And there was a few computer scenes. There was not much technology or reliance on technology.
They use phones a lot. It felt like a lot, but we kind of decided that that's just the way communication was at this time, and we're just so used to cell phones.
Yeah, we're so used to holding the tiny brick. We don't think about the handheld receiver.
Yeah. I mean, you show this, and this would be interesting to show this to kids in their early 20s or even teens, and they'd be like, "What is that?" They'd be like, "What do they? Why don't they just pick up their phone?" I'm like, "Yeah, because they don't have one."
So you grab them and say, "That's one of the best car chases in all film history, you little turd."
Yeah. Well, they would be like, "So we did this. We said, hey, this is like what part of the Beastie Boys Sabotage video? How much of that is borrowed?" Because it is literally not shot for shot, but a lot of it is borrowed for that music
definitely
video.
an homage to the the film. And I'm sure those boys grew up watching Bullitt and all that stuff.
So there was some continuity issues. I'm going to point out a few of them, but there's also
Dan's continuity corner.
A lot of framing that was done. A lot of the filmmaking was really interesting with a lot of shots using reflections and
a lot of reflection. A lot of like bars and stuff crossing their path.
Yeah, so
in the foreground.
There was a lot of gradients and banisters and lattice work in the foreground to kind of make you feel. We decided it kind of makes you feel like you're a witness to reality.
Yeah,
you're not involved in the action.
You're just watching it,
but you're there. You're right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's throughout the whole thing. And we were talking a little bit as the movie went along. Well, Brian would point out, well, you can see the ceiling, so this is done on location. And a lot of it was done on location. The outside shots obviously were on location, not done on a soundstage.
Yeah.
But there was a few scenes that were inside of large spaces that could have been done, like when the first time Steve McQueen's character visits his girlfriend, and that he's walking through an office space, and you don't see any hanging down lights. You don't see anything above.
That felt like a stage, a sound stage. But a lot of this was filmed on location. And we should mention right now that there were not a lot of special effects tricks.
None.
There were, there were
a few.
There were a couple process shots, like some reflections in the rearview mirror of the cars during the car chases. Yeah. But everything else was done with stunts and practical effects.
Yeah, as you see the cars go whipping around the corners during the chase scene, you're like, you can see the other tire tracks of how this is like the third or fourth take they've done, because they kind of screwed up the other ones probably, or they just did it to get the right one.
Whereas if they had that in a current day movie, CGI would just remove the previous tire tracks.
Yeah, and how many times did they lose the hubcaps off the car, the front lead car? Like a lot. More than
Dan, the standard wheel amount 6.
Yeah. Right.
Wait, it's not 6? Oh, no.
And I kept pointing out, it's shiny again. Oh, the hubcap's back. Oh, wait, no, it just flew off. They bumped, and they do scrape the car up a lot, and
like
it bumps into something a number of times.
The body stayed damaged.
Yeah.
Like the body kept it, but then they just, I guess, kept putting hubcaps back on, or just they just didn't catch it, I guess.
Yeah. Or, I mean...
or it didn't matter.
My guess is some of the chase was filmed out of sequence.
Yeah.
And,
right. I genuinely always forget about that.
And the editor probably chose shots based on screen direction and pacing and what would make the car chase exciting. And by the way, dear listeners, this is the car chase for film history and film studies 101. This is the one that everyone talks about. So if you're interested in film, you should watch Bullitt just for the car chase. Yep. And I would also say there is a foot chase in the hospital that is actually pretty amazing to watch also.
It tells the story without having to speak really well.
Oh, yeah.
You see the action, you see the stoppage and suspense, and then you see the move, and then you see the chase. And then you see him break a glass out of an exit door that was mirrored and it wasn't safety glass. The one piece of glass, a window in a hospital that didn't have safety glass. The only one.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, I pointed that out as it was happening. I'm like, oh, well, he had to break through something. It had to make it believable, because the guy was smart enough to block the door and you couldn't get out. And he thought, well,
he did. It did stop him for a little bit.
If he did that, he was thinking, he's not going to be able to break through the glass because it's hospital glass everywhere. And literally you'd be peering through it, then the focus would shift and it would fade out.
Yeah. So it's got the little grates.
The lattice work, little metal lattice work to keep the glass from shattering and hurting someone. Yeah,
correct. Even though at the end you're in a big airport and the dude just falls through it. It's not like he jumped through it; he just fell through it.
He had been shot twice.
Yeah. 2 bullets went through the glass before that. That's why I thought he fell through it okay.
It weakened the glass, and he was weakened because his chest was a sucking wound.
And looked like somebody had threw a bunch of red paint on him. I was like, and that was
there was a deleted scene where Bullitt casts a magic spell to pull him towards him. They thought, it doesn't really fit in the film.
So if you can... As anyone who's seen films from this era or this period of time in American filmography, you'll find that this is not an uncommon thing. If you watch TV shows, cop dramas from this period, it's very, very common. They're just, they show it. There's no splat pack or anything like that. It's just suddenly red paint shows up on the outside and there's a little hole in the fabric. And you're like, okay, you didn't actually see anything explode or go through. But when you go to the close-up, he's like got splatter on both sides and there's a hole on each side. And I'm like, wow, that's a really strong bullet, because they normally don't go through the body after it's gone through something else. It's slowed down enough that it just hits and stops.
In a movie titled Bullitt, I think they do.
Yeah, and you did see the bullets at the very, very end. They were pretty big sized bullets too.
Yeah,
I don't know what kind of weapon he was using. It wasn't a revolver though. It didn't look like a revolver.
I actually kind of liked how they did the gunshots. The few there were 4 or 5 total,
and so
but I like that the guy on the bed had the throwback of his jumping back throwback effect.
Right, there was no wire work, so he had to fling himself against
did.
the wall.
It looked so fake.
I even noticed that he was getting on the bed, wondering why would he get on the bed, and then Brian mentioned that he had to jump back. Okay, that tracks.
He didn't want to get hurt. He wanted to land on the bed when he fell after being shot.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you guys noticed, but there were some shots fired at the airport at night, and there was one in the distance that hit a dirt bank, and there was a big puff of dirt.
Yeah.
And there were some sparks as the bullets hit the pavement.
Oh, we could talk about sparks every time a bullet gets hit on something. We had an episode at Once Upon a Time a number of years ago that was bullets being shot and how many sparks can you actually make.
Oh, yeah.
Every time a bullet is fired. Right. It's like, oh, that's fake as heck. Yes, it's quite hilarious. And there must have been inspiration for that from somewhere because that's not normal.
To be able to see those sparks from the bullets, you have to take your face off.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably an attempt to show that the bullet has some effect, but it's clearly missed the target.
Yeah.
Which was the
right.
person. Yeah.
Because a normal person wouldn't believe that, I'm 150 feet away, I'm holding this pistol, and I'm looking with one eye, and I can actually hit my target that far away. It's like, no, that's not it. In an airport outside on the tarmac, it's not going to happen. I don't care how good of a shot you are at that distance, and dude's just laying there.
Well, I mean, that's pretty tough, but also trying to fire a shotgun out of a moving car while the cop's chasing you.
Yes, and still
before
hitting
you
the
get exploded. Yeah.
Chase scenes versus the use of score. So we had no music other than environmental music that came from a radio and from a band that was playing in the restaurant.
Yeah, I think the opening credits had music, and then it was 40-ish minutes?
About 40 minutes before we heard any music at all. They really use background sounds and kind of a natural soundscape for this film. Mm-hmm. And the first real music after the title sequence we got was music coming from a band in a restaurant.
Yep.
And then about 5 minutes later, music coming out of a radio and scene.
Now, that's didactic music source?
Diegetic.
Diegetic.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly what it means, but it means it's coming from within
the scene.
Something actually in the scene.
Yeah,
okay.
It's happening
That's cool.
there live not live, but it's happening as you
right.
in the shot versus
it's not meant for just the audience, it's within the scene itself.
Yeah. The characters
it comes from the world of the film.
Yeah.
So the people who are in it can actually hear it and experience it as well.
Yeah. And then the tost we actually hear score is the chase at the hospital.
Yeah.
So this is the foot chase, not the car chase.
Yep. And there's some really interesting, I guess you would say, from that era use of, if you've ever seen Bond films where they have, or, any spy film from that era, like really, really high, wood block, and then really high violin string that's just really, really
always a lot of high violin,
or
a
like
lot of
plucking of a harp or something. That's
a good way
really
to
super
to
high.
just get that emotional range immediately.
Right, yeah, and a little ride cymbal and a little standing bass, little thumpy.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And score is by Lalo Schifrin. We'll give a cry out to him.
Shout out.
Yeah. Let's see, what else can we talk? Oh, the use of reflections.
Yes, lots
in
of
this
that.
film.
Yeah, there's a lot of reflect. There's a whole, not a whole scene, but a really pivotal collection of dialogue within a scene when he's talking to the senator, I think, and Bullitt stayed in reflection while everyone else went reflection regular. You
right,
never saw his face in reflection.
So there's reflections on windows.
Yeah,
there's reflections in the door, a revolving door at a hotel.
In the mirrors of the cars,
during the car chase in the rearview mirror.
I mean, because he'll look, the driver of the bad guy car would glance over and see him.
Oh, that's right. He was looking at that a lot. Yeah.
He did that at least 3 or 4 times as they were driving away, thinking, "Oh, we got away, ha ha ha!" And then he looks and he's like, "Oh, he's behind us still."
Yeah, I mean, I didn't decipher a storytelling reason for the reflections, but they used it a lot as a stylistic element, I would say.
and effectively. I mean, I don't think it was overdone. I think it was purposeful. It helped, again, frame these shots. There was so much framing of physical properties within the shot that they would be standing in a doorway or they'd be standing against the building and you'd see the frame of the building.
Like once you mentioned it, I started noticing more like door frames are walking into or two buildings on either side. Like, oh man, it really is happening all the time. He wants you to see exactly. He's pointing you where to go.
Yeah.
Right.
So this shot where they're standing outside of the hospital and he's looking, and I think it's when the partner comes up and you see
when the bad guy's looking, or
when Steve McQueen after the chase scene and he's standing.
Oh yeah.
And it shows them and they're standing there and you can see into the hospital. You can see the doors to the hospital are open and there's a vanishing point. Like it's like you can see it framed directly behind them. Like you're there. You're physically there. That's what it's going to look like.
Oh yeah.
It's not made up. It's not a soundstage. It really does look like this. And I think that helps sell the movie really well.
Oh, I'd agree.
And the one thing is, if you've ever, it was interesting how there wasn't any traffic during the car chase scene when they went south of San Francisco, we're guessing.
Man, I would have never thought of that if you never mentioned it. It never occurred to me.
On his way back, and when they go south to San Mateo to see the girlfriend or the Patsy, the female
Patsy's
Patsy,
girlfriend, yeah.
It was nothing but stop and go the whole way. And I'm like, well, see, that's realistic. And what they were showing before was totally not realistic. Because it's a 2-lane highway and there's not bumper to bumper traffic the whole way.
Dan broke the movie for me a little bit. Yeah. I can still enjoy it, but man,
sorry,
you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I mean, the biggest continuity problem I had as we were watching this, and I tried to watch for these kinds of things in the older movies. So they're in the hospital. They're there at 3 a.m. They bring the guy in. He's getting operated on, and then the senator shows up. And then suddenly, and literally with the passage of time, you don't know if it's been an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours. When they get to the chase scene, he runs outside and it's daylight. And I'm like, that happened really close to each other. It didn't make sense to me because they didn't show. I saw a clock on the wall that said like 3:15 a.m. That's when the senator showed up. Like they got there at 1 a.m, took them 2 hours to show up, and then there's a chase scene.
And now it looks like it's noon.
Yeah. It literally was bright daylight when they ran outside. Not even like morning. And if you've ever been to San Francisco, it's foggy every morning, period. Like, and they're in the city.
But dear listener, if this is your first time watching Bullitt, this won't break the movie for you.
No, it's just a continuity thing that it just didn't make sense when I watched it. Because I've seen this before and it was like, all right, so what can I pick on? Because there's not a lot to pick on.
No, there's not. I would say the script is a little bit nebulous. It's pretty light. Hard to. It's a simple story, but they don't necessarily tell it simply. I found myself. I was lost a couple times.
Yeah.
Okay, and it makes me feel a little better because I also.
And I was also bored a couple times.
Yeah.
It's a meticulous movie. It takes its time with pretty much every scene. Yeah. But there's a lot of times I just remember watching and thinking, we're still watching. Okay,
he's still chasing him on foot across.
No, not even that. Just establishing shots of like just anytime they start and think, okay, well they're gonna get to Bullitt soon.
So the
Bullitt's on screen.
Question:
what's happening?
The whole restaurant scene with the music, with the jazz, the flautist, and what did that even mean? Did that set anything up? It's like, okay, he met the girlfriend at her office. We couldn't tell if she was an architect or an artist. Think architect or maybe city planner or dealing with something.
I think it's trying to show that it's really cementing how much of how human he is. How just like Bullitt's super cop, but he's also like
he hangs out with his friends.
Right. It's not his shift to watch after the guy. Yeah. So this is what he does on his free time. Or that was the courtship scene with his girlfriend.
It could be.
Maybe when they met at the architect's office, they weren't an item yet. And then that was the courtship. And the next time we see them together, they're in bed.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
I don't know if she's living with him or not, but she sure does spend a lot of evenings there throughout the rest of the movie.
Enough evenings to see something that scares her and she can't be with him anymore.
Yeah. And maybe that's part of it is, you you are so like you continually see this, interact with it, and she doesn't like that. And what are you going to become? Eventually you're going to become so numb to it. What does that mean for me? And it's like, well, we went out to dinner. I mean, we went out to a cool place. We hung out and I had food with your friends and listened to this, snappy.
But that was kind of the last time we
jazz.
see him having fun. Because the rest of the movie is him
chasing
somebody or interrogating somebody, being pretty humorless and straightforward.
Yeah.
For the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And until we see him
But
shoot that guy, and it really shakes him.
Yeah, but at the end, he comes home and she's still there waiting for him.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
he gets back to his life. I mean,
just another day at the job.
I think it would take another watch and analysis to figure out the kind of subplot, which is their relationship.
Yeah.
Because that really is a separate story thread. I mean, I think the one scene for me that kind of stands out that doesn't really work is when she pulls him aside after they see the dead Patsy girl.
Yeah.
And they're on the bay with the water behind them and the
she's holding a flower and putting it in her hair.
Zodiac. That's
yeah.
That reminded me of the scene in Zodiac.
Yeah, and they have this discussion about if this is your life, you're going to become numb. You're going to become like this ugliness, and I don't want this for us. And it really, to me, felt like, wow, this is kind of
forced a little bit, maybe
forced and coming out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, she did just see a body.
She did,
and that's her own fault. She followed the other cops running to the room.
I was
she
wondering why she followed, but I think she thought maybe it was going to be Bullitt, and she wanted to see like, my beau, is he okay?
And if you were watching, as soon as she walks in the room and he recognizes that she's in the room when he turns around after
he's on the phone, his big headset phone.
He hangs up and he immediately stands in front of her, so you don't longer see her. He's blocking her view to the body, but you're also he's blocking her from it. And I think that's
he's
really,
protecting her.
That's a visual cue that I'm standing between you and the ugliness that I experience every day.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to be a part of that. I want to protect you from it. And he even says that, kind of implies it in some of the dialogue. It's like, I don't say it because I can't.
Yeah.
Interesting film. Lots of interesting action. The car chase scene, Brian had mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Why don't I tell my insider story? So for those of you who are interested in film history, but feel like, okay, this film from the 68 has no relevance to me. Way back in my career when I was working for Lucasfilm and we were working on episode 1, the Jar Jar Binks episode, I was a research editor, and one of the films that the art department wanted to see was Bullitt and the car chase in specific, so they could storyboard out the pod racer scenes in episode 1.
That's so cool.
And so people have said that George Lucas is derivative, but I would say that he likes to look back on great scenes from film history in order to get his chases, his races, his aerial dogfights right.
Yeah.
And so for episode 1, the pod racer scenes, they saw how the editor built the Bullitt chase scenes, and they wanted to review that as they drew storyboards and got ready for episode 1, the first movie of the
new trilogy,
the new trilogy,
the first 3 of that part.
Or I guess
the first 3 of the first part.
I was going to say the second trilogy, but that's the original. Oh boy,
it is whatever.
Episode 1 with Jar Jar Binks and the pod racers. So I worked on that, and the way I worked on it was I provided several chase scenes. Bullitt was the only one I actually remember because it's the greatest one.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
that's so cool.
In reference to what we're actually talking about, for those that aren't familiar, we're talking about how many, when he says storyboarding, how many frames are up close, how many show a point of view from the camera to the person, what direction they're looking at, how many outside third person shots from like a boom shot from, above or straight at it? Do you see the other vehicle in the same frame or not? All of those things matter. All of the building of that story that's being told visually through what's being shown in the right order. That's what we're talking about.
Each shot in a film has to be set up. A camera has to be placed, and the action has to be performed, and that is extremely time consuming.
It's expensive.
And so way before shooting starts, what they do is they draw a visual cartoon of each and every shot.
Yeah, effectively a comic book kind of
the film, certainly for action sequences.
Yeah. And we talked about like moving into the frame, moving out of the frame, like moving out of the frame to the right versus to the left, going towards something or back to something. The sequences from within the car, I want to say I only saw one or two that looked like it was sort of a static vehicle, and the windows were it was a composite shot and not a single shot. But most of it was single shot. The cameras, they had to have had some really, really small cameras to fit into the car to be able to
the ambulance, right? Like
where you're looking from the back seat over the shoulders of the person, through the windshield, through the dash, onto the front of the vehicle as it's driving down the road, and it's shaky. You actually feel like you're in the car and it's shaking, and it probably was legitimately driving down the road.
Which I feel like this scene does well, where they give you the wide, here's what the vehicles are doing for a few shots, and they cut into the actual cab for the shaky, scary part, like the Bourne movies now, but just enough to go, oh man, this is crazy, and then go back to a wide shot to see the whole chase, because it's cool. It's a cool chase.
This sequence does a very good job of telling you where the geography of the scene. Yeah. You most of the time, you know where the protagonist and antagonist vehicle is at all times, which is really hard to follow.
Yes, it can be.
And it can be.
Yeah.
It shuts down the robots punching robots problem.
Yes.
Right.
Or ribbit robot punching ribbit robot.
What a phenomenal teaser.
I know, right? The thing that I will say is continuity of how many times this vehicle runs into something. And there was even a shot where the front vehicle comes up and the right side of the vehicle brushes up against something that's like a sidewall or something.
No, it's a parked car. Which in turn bumps the tripod of the camera
and cuts it off.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's shot.
And they don't edit out that part.
I hope the focus puller was okay.
Yeah,
the assistant camera person.
Yeah, or the gaffer that was trying to make sure it stays on its rails or in place. Yeah. So who knows?
You guys are laughing until those guys' ghosts show up tonight.
I know, right? They're going to visit us. I don't know. Any other thoughts before we move on to the beers?
No, I mean we covered Bullitt pretty well.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I read the Quentin Tarantino book, Cinema Speculation, so I knew ahead of time it was slower than I would have expected. But it's late 60s, early 70s movies.
Yeah.
A lot more burn, a lot more time
It's
taken.
not out of character for movies from this era.
Yeah.
No, it's very James Bond. It's very Bond in its approach to the titling in the first part. Yeah. You see some really interesting, I was mentioning to the guys, I'm like, all of those titles are hand-drawn. It's all animated. And we had a little conversation about that, about like, there's people who are animators. That's their job, is to do the intro and outro credits.
It's funny you mentioned Bond. With the turtleneck towards the end of the movie, was this Steve McQueen's take on Bond?
I don't know, maybe. Because he was wearing like a cardigan and a turtleneck, and like whoever did the costuming for this, they knew that era because that's what they wore. They really did. And maybe they just walked down the street and said, "You're going to wear that."
I could see that. I could easily see that being the case.
We're going to go ahead and transition over to the point of the podcast where we talk about beers. As mentioned before, we had known what we're going to watch shortly before I went to gather at least one of them. One of them we already had in the beer fridge, and I'd been looking forward to drinking it, and that was the Hazy IPA. But the first one, I bought a Co-Pilot Pilsner from Everybody's Brewing.
That time it was a little rough for Dango's. I had one I really liked, but let's go to the first one.
Yeah. 4.9%, 27 IBU, so really clear. Some of us poured it into our glasses that we had, which was really cool because it just had a really traditional noble hop approach to this style of Pilsner. Oh, yeah. Really bubbly, really clean, thin body, not more crackery than bready. Just really nice hop flavor that's not super strong on the mouth. It complements. There's a little bit of astringency there, but it's just really, really gentle. I think it really improved as it warmed up a little bit too.
I'm sipping on a second one now, and I have to agree. I'm really catching the stringent, the like splash of hops. Everything is working really well together. This is a really tasty beer.
It's a very, very well balanced beer.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
As Dan and I would say, very drinkable.
So, yes. Are there any dialogue there on the beer that you would like to express?
Well, the flag says, "Beer for all. Our beer is premium, not pretentious. We create quality beer to foster connection and community. One where everyone has a seat at the table." And then nice little tasting note. I like it when a beer adds tasting notes. And it kind of matches what we're saying. It talks about the effervescence, Pilsner malt. It says here traditional noble hops. Dan, what's a noble hop?
Tettnanger. So Magnum American high bitter. So you're going to use that initially to give your amount of alpha acidity to make it bitter without a flavor.
Right.
Tettnanger is that middle of the road. And then the Saphir, usually it's more to less as they put it on the label. So Saphir is probably going to give it that aromatic at the end. Is interesting. We just had a lager presentation at the Oregon Brew Crew. Shout out to my buds with that. And we had a brewer from a really well-known brewery here in Portland talk about the different approaches that she does to making Pilsners and the 15 or so that they do at the brewery. A lot of different ways.
That's a lot of Pilsners.
A lot of different ways.
My mouth just started watering.
So, and she mentioned that, the fact that there's going to have a little bit of sulfur on it. So
sulfur?
You're going to find some... Sulfur is a compound that brings you aromatics. It carries the lighter, anything that doesn't have a whole lot of content to it that's in the liquid. If there's not a lot of it, it's not very strong. Sulfur is what it's going to ride on. So the sulfur out of either the grain or out of the yeast. The hops doesn't have sulfur. The hops ride on the sulfur as it's released. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. In some things it's bad. You don't want it to smell or taste like eggs, but it is a compound.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. I was sitting here thinking, am I going to sound dumb if I smell the egg smell?
No, it shouldn't. It's not that amount. It's a small amount, but it's also part of the astringency that you're getting. So if it's a beer like...
Interesting.
Sometimes if there's a little bit more of that bitterness that hits, it's because it's possibly has more sulfur in it, or it's a natural sulfur that exists and they're not removing that in some way, or they're adjusting their pH to mitigate it. That's kind of like the old school way of doing Pilsners out of Europe. That's how you're supposed to do it versus West Coast and American styles, which tries to eliminate that altogether, which is kind of sad.
Also, the American style, they're always firing AKs just in the air while it brews.
Yeah. Yes. So
also, what other podcasts you can get talk like this about sulfur in beer astringencies? Come on, guys, subscribe.
And AR-15s.
Nah, that was more of a riff.
So I would say that, there is a little bit of this beer had the finish on the back lingered dry and a little greeny, so it's going to taste cereally a little almost. And that's also a traditional Pilsner approach to the malts. Nothing wrong with that. Totally fits the character of the beer. It's right at around 5%. The bitterness level is more of a flavor than a sharp acidity. So again, those Magnum and Tettnanger are going to give you that alpha acidity, that amount of, hey, this has a sharpness to it. And then the Saphir is going to be the aromatics more than anything. The Tettnanger is going to give you some aromatics, but small amount, depending on when they added it. So usually they'll even they'll do the additions in the whirlpool. So after it's boiled and as they're cooling it down, right when it's at the 221 to boil, they pull it off the heat, starts cooling down, and they whirlpool it. And that's how they kind of separate out the grains and stuff. And, so there's not grains, but they do that in order for it to cool down faster. They do a whirlpool. And so you add hops at that point. It's not necessarily going to break down all the chemical compounds. So you're getting certain parts of the hop, but not all of it. And there's processes that they do at the professional level. And you can do it as a home brewer too, but really, if you have an opportunity to watch a professional brewer do it and talk to them about it, you'll learn a lot about brewing from the technical side, because that's what it is. Versus home brewers, like most of them aren't really caring about that.
More of an art.
It's baking bread. It's baking bread, baby. It's all it really is. I have my ingredients. You put them in the right order. You measure them out roughly. As long as your equipment's clean, it should turn out. If you have a bad ingredient, of course, it's going to go bad. So you hope you don't have a bad ingredient. If it's old or stale or if it's gotten infected with something.
A human foot.
Yes. Don't go crushing your grapes and then drinking it and expect it to taste good.
And don't go chasing waterfalls.
All
No,
right.
that's so fascinating about the whirlpool. I never knew about that.
Yeah,
That makes, the cooling thing makes sense because you're breaking the surface tension and releasing more heat, but that's so fun.
Yep. And so as they're transitioning, so they adding, and even at that point, as you're cooling it down slowly, or at whatever step you're going to take it down to a certain temperature and leave it there, going up both to boil and coming off of the boil. So decoction, they raise it up to a certain temp, then they let the rest of it boil, and then they add that after they've let it rest a few times. So there's so many different ways of brewing. Hearing a professional talk about it's really amazing. If you have the opportunity here in Portland, if you go to a brewery that does a lot of Pilsners or does a lot of, lagers, ask them about it.
Yeah.
And see what processes they use. Sometimes the people serving you will know, sometimes they don't. They'll be like, hey, the brewer's right over there, or the assistant brewer's right over there. Or
depending on the night, you might
ask them.
Ask them.
Depending on the night, you might get a whole tour.
And sometimes you'll get a free tour, and sometimes you get free beer. If you take those chances, you never know.
Speaking of free beer, thank you for buying this, Dan.
Yes, of course. It's no problem at all.
How do you think this matched the movie? I thought it went really, really well.
I think from
I agree.
a stylistic, that we didn't really see. I was keeping an eye out. I didn't see any beer. We saw a Stroh's sign on the side of a building, but that doesn't really count. He wasn't drinking at all during the film.
Well, he's on the job.
Correct.
Super cop.
But if you see any kind of the behind the scenes or any of the stories behind the filming, he was chugging a lot of beer during the making of this movie. So it's like, I was trying to find something from San Francisco, but it's like, whatever. It's okay.
But I thought just the fact that a lot of the scenes happened during the day, early part of the movie, it just felt like following a guy on his day at work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wasn't anything crazy until, the door gets kicked in and some people get murdered. Yeah.
I think thumbs up from all of us on this one.
Yes.
Or if you can't find this specific Pilsner, I think a lighter beer would be really good to go with the first part because it's a little slower, not as much action.
It's setting up a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff.
The story's getting built, and the character development is really nice. His partner
And
is
they're
really
building the
reliable.
world. I mean, San Francisco is definitely kind of a character in this.
It really is. That with the
and they're
with
building
the bodega.
The environment itself does play a role, especially as they're doing a car chase and going up and down the hills and running around corners.
He was walking that bodega. I flash back to Venom when he walks in that one all the time. It's like, oh no, we're gonna see Tom Hardy be sweaty.
Yeah, something like that. And he does actually. I mean, he goes in and buys some vegetables for dinner, and the shop owner's like, they're fresh, they just got here. So I mean, it's like he knows the neighborhood, and I think. So if you're going to cut a scene out, that would be something you could cut out. That led nothing to the film. It led nothing to the story. It just showed
you who Bullitt is.
Yeah, it dug into his character. It made him more rounded.
Yeah,
and maybe it spoke to the fact that he was more than just a cop, and so maybe he was worthy of being in the relationship with the hot lady.
Yeah,
I really think all the leading up to that, building his character is just so you felt as horrified as he did when he fired his gun the 2 times.
Yeah, he didn't want to do it.
No, he.
But once he did, he walked around with it in his hand. He didn't put it away. And I was like, oh, here, dirty here. Here we go.
Yeah. Speaking of references older than at least me,
the second beer we did. So this is Vice Brewing or Vice Beer out of Vancouver. They have a tap room in downtown. They have a location out on East Mill Plain.
Is that the one with the little setup for the TV and the...
Yeah, so this is old school 1980s, 1990s era approach to all their marketing and all the stuff that they have.
Big VHS tapes, an NES system, a bunch of Nintendo games.
This is called Ribbit Robot, and this is kind of an ode to the old school, like I said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle and
Transformers.
A Transformer with a cassette tape on the front and like big shoes.
Run DMC chain.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. So it's hazy with Eldorado, Calypso, and Mandarin, Bavaria. So it's a fruity
Mandarino.
I can't speak today. So they come in tall boys. These beers were purchased. This specific one was purchased with a bunch of other beers at John's Marketplace in Southeast. You can probably find it at grocery stores around Vancouver. Maybe not so much around Portland. It's a lot harder for the self-distributed.
It hasn't really
like this
gotten through that barrier yet.
If you're not
until we start filling Brian's trunk with delicious beer.
That's right.
So
I'll make a pilgrimage once a week.
When we open this,
Welcome to Moving to Beer, where we bootleg beer, I guess. Sorry, Dan.
So double dry hop, really, 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 really on the nose. As soon as you opened it up, it was like, bam, I'm smelling hops. I'm smelling citrus, and just really kind of pungent, almost dank in a way.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
It was super dry on the tongue. Yeah, 6.5%. So really not a big up in your face, big beer, but definitely orange and papaya and melon, and then some light hoppiness on the back as it dried out even more. As it warmed up, so I poured mine into a glass, and I had some yeast sediment in the glass, which is totally fine and expected for smaller breweries who, I don't know if it was still fermenting in the can, because it did foam out quite a lot more than the first beer did. And that would be my guess, is that this is not a filtered beer, and it's going to continue to ferment, and that's good for the effervescence. It lets the CO2 be present. It's just, who knows where in the canning process these landed, if it's towards the end or the beginning of the run. That's where you're going to get the yeast sediment, because when they first took it up, you're pulling out of the keg fresh or the big vat if they're doing it directly off of their tanks that they're aging it in. Who knows? All I know is that it was tasty. The non-hop head at the table, what'd you think, Brian?
Initially, it was really sharp and very hoppy and very dry.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it probably more than the first beer as it warmed up. It got really balanced and kind of mellow as it warmed up in the glass. And I actually thought it kind of went better with the film at that point.
It was chasing both hospital. I think we got this one out right after the chase scene in the hospital, or right before. I can't remember.
Right after.
Right after it. And we're like, oh, we should probably get the other beer out and give it a go. And I'm glad we did, because I think...
Kind of. We first started drinking it during the car, right before the car chase.
Yeah.
But kind of by the time we had kind of the more emotional scene with the girlfriend, it had warmed up. Mm-hmm. And it kind of got much more mellow right as things kind of got more emotional in the film.
Just like Bullitt's heart.
Just like Bullitt's heart at the end, yeah. I mean, I had maybe 2 sips left at the end of the film. So right at the end of the film, when he was having his kind of emotional moment, finally this job had affected him.
Yeah.
The beer was kind of right to where I was really enjoying it. So
nice.
So I thought this went better with the film. That's what the non-hop head feels.
And us hopheads going to shout. Us hopheads going to shout you down now. Boo!
Please do. Tell me how I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think you're right on point.
I can't find a fault in your argument. I guess
6.8%. It's not. Again, it's not a big giant IPA.
It's a little bit of body, but it's not. It's not going to ruin you if you have 2 in an evening.
Correct. And I
depending
think
on your tolerance,
from a sipping perspective, good for sipping.
Oh yeah.
Some beers you got to drink cold. This one you can allow to warm up a little bit. Yeah. Totally fine with that. Not really going to affect the beer, other than it'll get more rounded and opened up a little bit, like you said, Brian. Mm-hmm. It has a really nice flavor profile and works better as it warms up a little bit. I think both of these beers, you can take your time sipping. You don't have to worry about it. Oh, it's going to get flat and whatever.
Yeah, I would say, because Brian, you were saying the second beer really matched up at the end of the movie. Would you recommend, if you can pace out right, 2 of just that beer for the whole movie, or open with the was it lager, Pilsner? Open with the Pilsner and always end with the hazy.
Wow, I mean, I think
it's a 2-hour film, so
the way we did it worked very well.
I'm really happy with how we did this.
Yeah, I mean, I had a good time drinking while watching this film.
Right.
Shocker!
Imagine that.
All
right, so
Dan called TMZ.
We finally had a successful beer and movie pairing. Oh my gosh. It only took 140 episodes.
All right, time to retire.
That's it. Mic drop.
So thanks for listening. As always, we really appreciate everybody hanging in there. And if you haven't seen this film, and
I'd recommend it.
Probably many haven't.
I probably watched it in college. I don't remember a lot of this. So it was really fun to watch as a new viewer today with these experts in film, and just, it's such a good time. Definitely watch this movie.
It is. The chase scene is very, like I said, if you've seen the Beastie Boys video, Sabotage, you're going to be like, oh, that's where they got that from. Yes, that's exactly where they got it from.
Those amazing source material.
Outfits, the costuming. We talked about the headdresses and wigs, and the old white
Costuming
women.
was great in this movie.
The old white women at the beginning.
It's a great slice of life for that time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
In that place. Yeah.
And especially like the scenes on the street or outside the hotels, or even the one in the end. I would say probably 20 minutes of the film take place in an airport, and a lot of it is all
the
audience.
strip airway,
the concourse.
concourse, thank
Concourse,
you.
yeah.
The concourse
And,
outside,
and you can
inside.
see some airplanes from airlines that are way defunct now.
Yeah, they no longer exist.
There's no more Pan Am. There's no more TWA. And,
What?
And there was one airline I didn't even know what the hell
I didn't
it was.
recognize it either. And I think international flights. It's San Francisco. They're going all over the place.
That was the Soul Plane. This is a tie-in to the Soul Plane movie.
I don't want no snakes on no plane.
That's a different plane.
I mean, the guy had a gun on the plane. I mean, like you walked out from the outside. You got past the guy with the tickets. You could just barge past him or sneak past him. It was not very secure.
Yeah,
If
movies
you had a ticket, you got on the plane.
Yeah, movies in the 60s and 70s are a testament to what life was like on airports before 9/11.
Like dude smoking getting on the plane. Like
Wild.
I was like, wow, man. And that's actually how it used to be. I mean, this is not made up. This is how real life was back then.
So I guess the only thing to watch out for is just culture shock, history shock of just how different things were and are now.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, just keep those things in mind. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Check these beers out if you've not tried
Yes.
them. Everybody's advice. Applause to you guys for making some interesting and good beers for us to have during this great film.
If you don't live where you can get these ones,
Find something similar.
start kind of light and then end with something that tastes nice all the way to warm up.
Yeah, because it's 2 hours. It's
or a
it's long
Stroh's.
film. Or a Stroh's. I was like, we're not going to go with the dad beers or the bad beers. We're just going to do something simple for this one. Sorry.
Cracking open vintage 70s cans.
I know, right?
that weird tinny kink.
Yeah, definitely. So, as always, the opinions expressed during the taping of this recording are those of the hosts. And, you need to get that hydration in, right?
Damn it, Bullitt. If you don't hydrate, you're going to dehydrate.
Yes, you will. And it's not going to end pretty. It's going
Tires
to be
screech
ugly.
nowadays.
So, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. Have a beer or two with your next film. If you're watching something fun, be safe out there.
Unless you're less than 21 years old.
Yes, and then get some
Then
non-alcoholic beer.
Have a nice
Capri Sun.
edible.
Have a nice non-alcoholic beer.
Wait a
or
minute.
something. Yeah, enjoy the films you watch, and thanks for listening. And we'll catch you on the next go round.
This is Blake saying goodbye.
And this is Brian signing off.
Alrighty, farewell, everyone.